This is a brand new channel update. Thank you everyone for coming along. Welcome to the video. Basically, this is all about answering questions and addressing subjects raised by Patreon supporters and YouTube members. It's a way of me saying thank you to all the support shown over the months and over the years to the channel. It's also a way of saying thank you, of course, to all the subscribers because everyone gets to watch this. Now, in this episode, we've got a whole load of different topics to address. The last few months have certainly been interesting. There is one other subject I want to address before we really get into the meat of this video, which of course is about the channel update. But this specific subject is about Frontier. Now, although this channel is very much focused on Elite Dangerous, that's by no means the full extent of this channel. It accounts for about 30% of the views overall, so a big part of the channel, but not the entire content. But something come up today about Frontier that I did want to discuss, and really, I don't think it's worthy of its own video, so this seems the best place to put it in here. So, what's happened? Frontier Developments today, their shares have tumbled. They've dropped by 35%. Each share is now worth around about £17. I think they dropped as low as £15 earlier today, and that's down from around about £26 on Friday. The height earlier in the year was £36 per share, so overall, Frontier have had a pretty significant hit to their entire share value. So, what went wrong? What's the cause of this latest tumble in Frontier share prices? Well, it turns out the latest game, Jurassic World Evolution 2, really hasn't been the big seller that they hoped it would be. This in turn has had a knock-on effect. Frontier initially estimated their revenues for this financial year to be around about £140 million. Due to the low initial sales of Jurassic World Evolution 2, and you'll also notice here they do mention the lower than expected sales of Odyssey as well. Frontier have downgraded these revenue estimates to be between £100 million and £130 million, so a significant downgrade. That in turn has shaken confidence from the shareholders, and the share value has therefore been downgraded. So why did Jurassic World Evolution 2 not have high initial sales? Well, the first game had some pretty high sales, very successful for Frontier, in fact one of their biggest selling titles ever. I think they probably, perhaps quite justifiably, had high expectations for the second title. Now there could be a whole load of different reasons why the second title hasn't initially sold quite as well, but that said, reviews on Steam seem to be mostly positive. Metacritic has mixed reviews with a user rating of around about 6.8 and a critic rating of 79%, so not really as good as it should be there. Certainly doesn't seem like an exceptional title. I wouldn't feel that way if I come across Metacritic anyway on that particular game, but also it doesn't seem too particularly terrible either. Frontier, meanwhile, feel that the low sales are due to a crowded marketplace. Yeah, November is always busy, and I think any games company knows that, so if you're going to release a title in November, then you better expect it to have to meet some pretty stiff competition. So I'm sure Frontier would have known that well ahead of time. November is traditionally a busy time for brand new games. Overall though, the company feels that the Jurassic World will sell enough over time, over the course of its lifespan, and meet and perhaps even exceed the revenue from the first version of Jurassic World Evolution. So yeah, there we have it. Now there could be some other factors in play here, of course. We know Frontier's reputation has recently taken a pretty big hit thanks to the failure of Odyssey, but not only Odyssey itself, but the way Frontier responded to that. A lot of loyal players have kind of wandered off, lost interest in Elite, and I've seen many comments both on my YouTube videos as well as across the internet saying that these people will never buy another Frontier game again. So has this had an impact as well? Of course, it could be a very vocal minority saying these things. There's no real way to be certain of exactly what's going on, but if I were to place some bets, I would say that Frontier's hit to the reputation has probably played at least a small part in their current sales of Jurassic World Evolution 2. Either way, if you're interested in how Frontier does in the future, this might be something worth keeping an eye on. After all, they do have some pretty big titles coming up over the next years, most notably their Formula 1 management game, a very big franchise for them. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get on to the main content of this video, which of course is about the questions to the Patreon and YouTube members. So let's get to that. Again, Always love these questions, always love spending time with all these. These are actually one of my most interesting videos that I do produce. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I really do like making these. Let's get to it. Now, over the coming months, I've also got a whole bunch of different things planned, not least of which is creating a new YouTube channel. More on that in just a bit. So before we go any further then, let's get to the various subjects that have been brought up by all the supporters. Starting with John. Will Microsoft Flight Simulator replay functionality be available on Xbox with the next update? So by the time you watch this video, you'll probably already have an answer for that question, as I believe the update will have already been released, or maybe not quite just yet. But either way, unfortunately, the answer to that is no. I've actually been playing around with the preview build of the Game of the Year edition, which I've had access to relatively recently. Unfortunately, the action replay is accessed through the developer mode of the game, so that means it won't be available for consoles, at least not yet. Now, Microsoft have said the current implementation of action replay isn't the final implementation. It's just a case that it's going to take a bit of time before they get round to improving upon it. So eventually, I guess, it will come to consoles, but for the first iteration, unfortunately not. Now, moving on to the next subject here from Hui. I know this is kind of a personal opinion question, and a question that probably several people already asked before, but do you think Star Citizen is a major flop in disguise? Or maybe it's an eternal POC, POC? Thank you for your work. So, no, I don't really think it's an internal proof of concept. I do think that you're right in pointing that out. There's a fair argument to be made there. After all, the CIG do iterate a design, they put it out there and then replace it with another design, or it ends up in a permanent design phases where they're always discussing about it and evolving upon it later on. But to be perfectly honest, I think all games go through that, at least all live service games. It's just with Star Citizen, it's far more blatant and far more obvious. So, no, I don't think it's a major flop. Financially, it's certainly not a flop. I think it's $400 million now. And in terms of gameplay, I don't really think it's a failure there either. And that's simply because it hasn't got all the mechanics in yet to be a failure. There's a lot of stuff they want to implement. And until they either say they're not going to do it, or they give up, or it just ultimately crashes down, then I don't think we can really accuse it of being a failure there. But by the same token, I don't really think we can call it a success either. Certainly a financial success, but beyond that, well, it's still a product in development. So Star Citizen, for many, I think is a very difficult one. It's one of those catch-22 situations, isn't it? At least if you're not really willing to draw a line in the sand. And for those who are willing to draw a line in the sand, there's pretty much an argument to be made for everything you want to say about Star Citizen. Is it a scam? Well, probably not an out-and-out scam, but there's ways to justify that belief, I do feel. Is it perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for gaming, something that's never before been tried? The funny thing with Star Citizen is that there's many different opinions out there about it, and to some extent, many of these opinions can, kind of be justified. So I think really, Star Citizen is just one of those things we have to sit back and watch, and yes, be very, very cautious along the way. Stefan, you've set yourself a very high standard of quality, which I enjoy very much. Well, thank you, Stefan. I appreciate that. I wonder how you manage your time over the week. How much do you invest in producing the videos? How much in actually playing the games? Does that even leave time for a day job? Well, that's, a really interesting question. In regards to the day job, YouTube is my day job. It's been that way for quite a few years now. It's my pretty much main line of income as well. So spend a lot of time on YouTube. At a minimum, it's 40 hours a week. Often it's many, many more hours than that. So yes, whilst I certainly find time to edit the videos together and record the footage, as well as play the games, what I don't find much time for is free time. So generally getting out there, having some hobbies, and gaming in general. There's a lot of things I don't get to do or don't get to play that I would really like to. So yes, at some point I'm probably going to have to enlist some help for YouTube, because the whole workload there is starting to get a bit too much. So eventually, very soon probably, I'm going to need a producer or an editor or just someone that can help out. So yeah, The whole channel is evolving for sure, and a lot of work goes into it, but more is needed. And more on that particular subject in just a bit, because the channel itself is going to be evolving, and there's also going to be an additional new channel coming along very soon, so I'll talk more about that further into the video. But interestingly, it does kind of relate to the next question from Commander Travers over on the Discord channel. They say, I'm quite up for an Elite Dangerous Battle of the YouTubers, a series of conflicts, small ship battles, large ship battle, and on-foot battle between yourself, Commander Burr, and the other big YouTubers like Down to Earth. What do you think? Could make for some interesting videos. Well, yeah, it's a great idea, although one thing for me, I'm not really into PvP, I never have been. Secondly, as I mentioned a moment ago, I'm really time limited, so unfortunately it's not something I'd be able to do, but probably something that's worth suggesting to the other YouTubers, because they might be wanting or willing to make something of that. Also from Commander Travers as a question here, I'm wondering what my views are, what your views are on if we'll ever see the most requested feature in the game, such as fully atmospheric planetary landings, cities, and the Panther Clipper. For myself, I think there's only an outside chance of these, because the first two seem beyond the capabilities of the graphics engine, and the later doesn't really have a use, as we now have carriers. So in terms of spaceships, I actually made a video this week about that. I think it's way past time that Frontier released some new spaceships in the game. The Panther Clipper would be a very likely candidate if they were going to go that way, and we do know there's some references in the game files to the Panther Clipper, specifically the Panther Clipper LX. Some data miners have found those references, so yes, I do suspect that eventually there will be some new ships, maybe even the Panther Clipper, but for really it's a question of when rather than if when it comes to that. When it comes to fully atmospheric planetary landings though, and cities, I think the answer to that is very different. Atmospheric planets like Mars of today, I do think eventually maybe even more complex atmospheres like that of Venus. But what I don't think we're going to see is complex gas giants or Earth-likes or anything like that, and I really don't think we're ever going to see cities. I just think at this point that if Frontier were going to do that, then they would have done that, and Odyssey has shown that even getting some of the basics in there is proving very difficult for both Frontier as well as the game itself. So unfortunately, whilst at one point a few years ago I would have highly anticipated those and expected them to come at some point, now I really don't think they will. But that said, that's not, beating up on Elite. I think Elite has got quite a long future towards it. I think there's many years left in the game yet. But the question there is not really about the longevity of Elite, but rather what sort of content, if any, they're going to add in the long-term future. Another question here would be about the regions and planets in space that are still permit locked. Do you think that Frontier still have plans for these in the gaming narrative? So that's a really interesting question. The systems have been permit locked for many years now, so at this point it's really just a case of guessing. Many years ago I would have said yes, they will definitely add content in there. We know that Frontier have spoken in the past that they did have plans for them, specifically Michael Brooks, the once executive producer for Elite Dangerous and a big lore writer for many of the things to do with the Thargoids in the game. He's basically moved on to other projects within Frontier, and I think a lot of the narrative really disappeared at that particular point, especially with stuff to do with those permits and with Thargoids. But if I had to place a bet, I'd say that there will be more Thargoid content coming at some point in the future. That would be Thargoid-based FPS, combat on planets, as well as maybe something new to do with larger Thargoid ships. That's been speculations for many years at this point, so again, it's more of a question of when, I feel, rather than if. Raptor, good old Raptor. When are you going to do some more live streaming again? Yes, you asked that a lot of times. Just do it. Live streaming is something I really do want to do. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that. Yeah, a bit of silence there. It is going to happen. Trip, are there any upcoming unreleased games that you are particularly looking forward to playing? Yeah, there's quite a few there. So let's have a think. What ones am I looking forward to the most? So one of those would definitely be God of War Ragnarok. Another would be the Legend of Zelda game, the next Breath of the Wild sequel. Very much looking forward to both of those. I'm also keen to see how Starfield turns out, trying to keep the hype in balance there because there has been some very issues with Bethesda games recently, but I do think there's some huge potential there for that game. And in terms of online games, unfortunately there's nothing really on my radar regarding that, so very much single player games at the moment, what I'm looking forward to seeing. The next question from Accentia: what's my favourite aircraft in a Microsoft Flight Simulator so far? So that one's very easy. That would be the Hawk T1A, released very recently by Just Flight. Fantastic modelling on that, both internally and externally, and it has a really nice flight model as well, perhaps arguably one of the best in the sim so far. Also, it's huge fun to fly. I've also just got my hands on the preview build of the Game of the Year edition for Microsoft Flight Simulator, and very briefly tried out the F-18, so looking forward to spending more time with that one as well. So yeah, jet fighters there for the win. Alright, Daedalus, what comes next year to Elite Dangerous? Because I missed something like Beyond the storyline have had in the previous versions. So yeah, what is coming next year for Elite Dangerous? As far as we know, fleet carrier interiors. Beyond that, I really don't think there's anything that's been announced at all. There will be some fixes undoubtedly going into Odyssey. Hopefully some fixes as well going into the base game or into Horizons, because that is much needed. A lot of people are still holding out hope for the console release, or news for the console release of Odyssey. Where will Elite Dangerous go next though? I think that is anyone's guess. It will depend on how much Frontier can get Odyssey up to scratch, I think. But I do expect that we can see Thargoid combat at some point in the not too distant future, both on the ground and hopefully with some new ships. So that's covered everything that's been raised on Patreon, over on Discord, as well as on the YouTube community section. So thank you for all that. Always fun to go through these different subjects and address them. I did mention early on in the video about a new YouTube channel. So this is going to be called Obsidious Maximus. In case any of you recognise the name, I did use it very briefly for a Warhammer related channel. I was planning on building a Warhammer channel and releasing a whole lot of content for that. But unfortunately, the policies for Games Workshop, the people behind Warhammer, have become particularly aggressive recently. And although most content creators on YouTube do seem to be generally okay, it's not really something I want to build a new YouTube channel on, with it being somewhat of a risky prospect, I feel. So we're going to avoid that and instead go into general gaming, and I'm going to pull along the name that I had for that YouTube channel, Obsidious Maximus, onto the new channel. So this will be general gaming, some perhaps of the aforementioned games, so Breath of the Wild 2 and the other games I mentioned, God of War Ragnarok when that eventually comes out, but also any other general gaming that comes up in the meantime as well. I'd also like to cover a few different editorial style videos, like the ones you've seen me cover in recent times, the pay to win video, the metaverse video, videos of that type, but with a more generalized focus as well. Keep in mind though that Obsidian Ant, my main channel, will always be my main focus. There's not going to be a cutback in content here. I do plan on keeping Elite content going and the Microsoft Flight Simulator content going, of course, as well as the general space theme as well. So everything that you've seen up until this point, there's going to be more of that, but there's also going to be some new content over on the new channel. I'm also planning at some point making a return to live streaming, but I'm actually hoping for a house move to happen very soon. No dates just yet, but the live streaming won't be happening until that house move has actually happened. So yeah, that will be happening in the future as well. So that pretty much brings us to the end of this video. As always, thank you so much for the ongoing support. It really does mean so much to me. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.